Welcome to Horror Sector, where the darkness reveals its secrets and the unexplained becomes undeniable. Tonight, we're diving into 4 chilling tales that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the objects around you. From a cursed truck that won't let go of its deceased driver, to a rocking chair possessed by an unknown spirit, a mirror that traps souls, and a terrifying encounter in a cemetery that left one man scarred forever. These aren't just stories, they're warnings. So turn off the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself, because what you're about to hear will stay with you long after this episode ends. My name is Alberto. I'm 42 years old, and I've worked as a truck driver for over 15 years at a freight company. I've traveled all over Mexico, Monterrey, Chiapas, Veracruz, Tijuana, and I've experienced many things on the road, but nothing as terrifying as what happened with truck number 47. A truck that everyone at the company avoided at all costs. Unit 47 wasn't new. It was a red 2008 Kenworth that the company had bought used several years before. According to what we were told, it had been totaled after an accident in which its driver died. A young man of 25 named David was hauling cargo toward Veracruz when he lost control on a curve near Orizaba. The truck overturned, caught fire, and David died trapped in the cab. The company bought the remains, rebuilt the cab, and it was as good as new. But for all of us, that truck was cursed. Ever since I started working at the company, everyone was talking about truck number 47. It wasn't just a story. All the drivers knew about it, and they all told the same thing. "It's haunted," they'd say. At first I didn't believe it, until one day I had to drive it for the first time. As soon as I opened the cab door, I felt a strange chill, like the air was thick with stuff. The inside smelled different from the other trucks, a mix of smoke and burnt oil. Boyfriend, I didn't think much of it and headed for Puebla. That night, right on the highway, was the first time I felt it. It was around 2 a.m. I was driving on the Mexico-Puebla highway listening to music when suddenly the radio turned off by itself. I thought it was an electrical malfunction, but after a few seconds it turned back on. However, it wasn't on the station I'd left it on. It was tuned to a channel that was only playing white noise, and through all that noise I clearly heard a voice coming out and saying, "I'm burning." A clear EVP. I almost ran off the road from the fright. I pulled the car over to the shoulder and turned it off. When I turned it back on, the radio worked normally. I tried to convince myself for a few minutes that I'd only imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. A week later, it was Tomas's turn with Unit 47, a colleague with more than 20 years in the profession. But what he experienced made me doubt everything. He told me that while he was going down the Cordoba road, he clearly saw that he was already accompanied. Next to him was a boy sitting in the passenger seat. He thought he was dreaming. He blinked several times, but the boy was still there. He was wearing a gray baseball cap and sweatshirt and was staring at the road with a serious expression. Tomas slammed on the brakes and got out of the truck, terrified. He stood for several minutes on the dark road without looking back at the truck. Later, when he had calmed down somewhat, he turned around and saw nothing. When he described to the supervisor what he had seen, it perfectly matched the description of David, the driver who died in that trailer. Another driver also swears he'll never touch that truck again. He recounted that on a night trip along the Tampico highway, he stopped at a gas station to sleep for a couple of hours. He turned off the truck, closed the curtains, and lay down in the bunk. Around 3 a.m., he was awakened by a soft whistling sound, as if someone were sitting next to his bed. He thought it was a gas station worker, so he looked out, but there was no one nearby. He tried to go back to sleep, but the whistling returned, this time from inside the cab. He got up, turned on the lights, and ran out of the truck. He slept the rest of the night outside, sitting on the curb at the gas station. Months later, I had that same truck again. It was on a long trip to Ciudad Juarez. It was 2:40 in the morning, and I'd been driving for hours without stopping. The road was completely deserted, so I decided to pull over for a moment to stretch my legs. I got out of the truck and lit a cigarette because it was freezing. I started smoking while texting some friends. I finished the cigarette and got ready to drive for a few more hours. When I came back and opened the door to get in the truck, there he was. A young man sitting in the passenger seat. He looked just like everyone described him, wearing a baseball cap and a hoodie. I froze. My legs wouldn't move. I couldn't run. I fell backward and crawled as best I could to the side of the road. Lying there, I prayed for several minutes until I mustered the courage to look at the windshield. And now, my truck was empty. Over time, all the drivers agreed on the same thing. Truck 47 is haunted. Many say that David's spirit never left because he died trapped in that cab, steeped in tragedy. The company continues to use the trailer because it works well, but after many complaints, it's only used for short trips that don't end after nightfall. This was my experience. Don't listen to this story I'm about to tell you at night. My name is Claudia. I'm 29 years old, and what I'm about to tell you happened almost 5 years ago when I was working as a private nurse in the city of León, Guanajuato. For over a year, I cared for an elderly woman named Emilia, a widow with mobility issues and high blood pressure who needed constant attention. No one else lived in the house because her children resided in other states. Therefore, I practically spent the entire week there, Monday through Friday, 24 hours a day. I only rested on weekends. My job was to manage her medications, accompany her to her appointments, and help her walk within the home, sleeping in the next room in case of an emergency in the early morning. Rosa also worked with us. She was the housekeeper. She was 52 years old and had been working for the family for over 10 years. Her job was to take care of the cleaning, laundry, and cooking. She arrived at 6 a.m. with her keys and left at 6 p.m. So almost every night the house was just Emilia and me. And it was in the midst of this quiet, uneventful routine that it all began. It all began with the arrival of a simple rocking chair. Doña Emilia's children came to visit one day. They thought it would be a good idea to buy her a rocking chair so she could rest more comfortably in the afternoons. They found it at an antique market and brought it home one Friday afternoon. It was made of thick wood in an old-fashioned style with a high back and a varnish worn with age. We placed it in the living room in front of a large window where the sun streamed in. From then on, it became Emilia's favorite chair. I would sit her there myself every day after lunch. Between 2 and 3 in the afternoon, until 7 at night, she would sleep there, or sometimes she would read books or a magazine. Then I would help her up to her room so she could sleep well at night. Sometimes, when she was already asleep, I would sit in that rocking chair myself to rest after long days at work. Everything seemed perfectly normal until strange things started. The first time I noticed something odd was one ordinary morning. It was around 7 a.m. when I went down to the kitchen for breakfast. Rosa was already there serving breakfast. When she saw me come in, she said, laughing a little worriedly, "You really didn't sleep at all this time." Her comment surprised me. I asked her why she said that. She replied that when she arrived at 6 a.m., the rocking chair was moving by itself, as if someone had just gotten up. I assured her that she hadn't gone downstairs all night and that Doña Emilia hadn't either. She would get up on her own because she needed help walking. We decided to ignore it, but that was the first sign. As the days went by, the incidents became more frequent. Sometimes the three of us, Doña Emilia, Rosa, and I, would be in the kitchen eating in broad daylight when suddenly we'd hear the soft creaking of the rocking chair. "That typical sound must be the wind," Rosita said the first time. But then it repeated itself day after day, moment after moment. The sound was so clear we could have sworn someone was rocking it in the living room. But every time we went to check, the chair was completely still. This started happening several times a day. Sometimes the movements were very gentle, other times the creaking was intense. It seemed as if someone was rocking violently. However, whenever we approached, it stopped. One afternoon, around 7 p.m., Rosa had already left. Doña Emilia was fast asleep in the living room in an armchair. I was next to her reading a book, and while we were both there, the chair started moving on its own, first gently, then more and more forcefully, until the movement was so abrupt it seemed as if someone invisible was violently pushing it. Fear paralyzed me. I had never felt anything like it. I wanted to scream, but I was afraid of waking Doña Emilia and frightening her. My heart began to beat so hard I felt it would burst out of my chest. Gathering my courage, I slowly approached and placed my hand on the chair to stop it. The wood vibrated beneath my fingers. It was as if something were still clinging to it, trying to push it away. But then, everything calmed down. At 8 o'clock at night, I half woke Doña Emilia. I carried her up to her room. When I laid her down, she opened her eyes wide and spoke to me in a trembling voice. I had also heard her move and seen her, but I pretended to be asleep out of fear. I tried to explain to Amelia that it had only been the wind, but I couldn't even manage it. I told her it was over and that she should go to sleep. That night I tried to sleep, but at 4 a.m., Doña Emilia's screams woke me up. I ran to her room and found her desperately trying to get out of bed. "Get me out of here! Get me out of here now!" she was crying. I calmed her down as best I could and checked her vital signs. She was stable. When she calmed down, she told me what she had seen. I felt someone breathing near me. I opened my eyes and there was a woman lying next to me, smiling. She was old, and her clothes were so dirty they looked black. That night, like every other night, there was no one else in the house. What she told me terrified me. Days passed, and the atmosphere in the house grew heavy at night. In the deepest silence, I could clearly hear the rocking chair moving on its own or dragging across the floor. Sometimes I found it slightly moved in the mornings. I tried to blindly convince myself that ghosts didn't exist until one early morning when I couldn't sleep and went down to the kitchen for something to eat. I had barely set foot on the stairs when I heard the slow movement of the rocking chair. I went down carefully, trembling with fear, and when I peeked into the living room, I saw it. It was an old woman sat in the chair, but it wasn't Doña Emilia. This one was shorter, plumper, with disheveled hair and an old, grimy dress. She rocked calmly in the darkness as if she were alive. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't answer. Instead, she began to rock so violently that it seemed she would break the chair. Terrified, screaming, I approached the light switch on shaking legs. As soon as I turned on the light, that woman in the rocking chair disappeared into the darkness, but the rocking chair kept moving on its own. That's when I realized it had all started when the chair arrived. I woke Doña Emilia and told her what had happened, tears welling in my eyes. She confessed that she too had seen it several times, but didn't want me to think she was crazy. That same morning, we decided to put an end to this. As best I could, I dragged the chair to the sidewalk. We left it there without looking back. The next morning, it was gone. Someone had taken her. To this day, I don't know who or what manifested in the chair. I only hope that whoever has it now never has to go through what we went through. Because when something from beyond clings to an object, the fear it provokes is never forgotten. What I'm about to tell you marked my family forever. My name is Furman. I'm 36 years old, and it all started with something as simple as buying a used mirror at a flea market. It was a Sunday morning when we decided to go to the Klawick flea market. We went with the idea of buying a few things for the house, and among the stalls of used goods, we saw a large, full-length mirror with a thick, heavy wooden frame. My wife said it would be perfect for our bedroom. The vendor assured us it was from an old house they were emptying and that it was in good condition. We bought it for 800 pesos, and that same day, we hung it in front of the bed. But from the very first night, things began to change. I remember perfectly the first thing that happened to us. The next morning, when we woke up, my wife told me the mirror looked strange. When we looked at it, we noticed it was completely fogged up, as if someone had blown steam on it, and even though the window was open, the weather was dry. The odd thing was that in the middle of the fog there were fingerprints. They weren't ours because neither of us had touched it since we hung it up. We thought maybe it was our son, but when we asked him, he said no, that he hadn't even been in our room. We didn't think much of it. We cleaned it, but it happened again. One night, as we were going to bed, my wife noticed the mirror was fogged up again. But this time it wasn't just fingerprints. When we got closer, we clearly saw a word written with a finger. Help. We stood there in silence, staring at the word, trying to find an explanation. Maybe the seller had written it before, I thought. We cleaned it up and forgot about it again. But those strange occurrences began to happen more frequently. A few days later, my wife was folding laundry in the afternoon. I was fixing a door when I suddenly heard her call my name. I ran to the room and found her standing pale in front of the mirror. She told me that while she was folding clothes, she saw a small figure behind her in the reflection. She said it looked like a child standing very close, but when she turned around, she was alone. Our son was at school. The door was closed, and yet she swore she had seen him. Nothing else happened that night, but from then on, we both started noticing small movements of objects near the mirror, brushes appearing on the floor. The lotion my wife left on the nightstand was lying in another part of the room, as if it were being pushed from there. One early morning, while we were sleeping, we heard some dry tapping on the glass. It was as if someone had touched it with their finger from the inside. But the incident that worried us the most happened to our son. One morning before leaving for elementary school, he ran into his room and putting lotion on our faces. She was looking at herself in the mirror, but suddenly she started screaming. He ran to his mother with tears in his eyes, saying that a boy was behind him. He said the boy was there, right next to his back, watching him and smiling. We tried to calm him down, but from that day on, he was afraid of the mirror. Every time he passed by the room, he would hurry past and sleep with the door closed. One night, it was strange. We heard him crying in his sleep, saying that the boy wanted to get out. From that moment on, it all escalated. More than once, he woke us up at 2 or 3 in the morning with a sharp noise in the wall. When we got up, we would see the mirror swaying from side to side as if someone had pushed it, but it was too heavy. The air couldn't have done it. A couple of times we heard tapping on the glass during the day, even when no one was in the room. One afternoon, I'll never forget it. While my wife and I were watching television in the living room around 10 p.m., we heard 3 very loud knocks coming from the bedroom. I ran to see what it was. I thought it was my son playing, but when I went in, I saw that the mirror was vibrating. I went closer, and soon it began to fog up completely, and small handprints started appearing all over the mirror. They were like a child's hands. One handprint was loud, as if it had been hit. My wife and I held hands and began to pray with our eyes closed. We began to pray the Lord's Prayer until it calmed down. We opened our eyes, looking in the mirror, and in the reflection a very pale child ran after us from one side to the other. It wasn't a shadow or a flash. We saw him clearly. That was the first and only time I saw him with my own eyes, and it was enough for me to no longer want to be alone in that room. I decided to get rid of the mirror. I put on gloves, carried it with all my strength, and took it out of the house. I walked several blocks until I left it next to a dump far from our home. From that night on, everything ended. We never heard knocks again, nor did we ever see the child. On the way back, when I went back inside the house, the atmosphere felt lighter, as if something had gone with that mirror. Today, every time I pass by a flea market and see an old object, I always think the same thing. What story does it have behind it, and what could come with it? Story 4. I don't usually tell this story, but I think it's time to do so without any filters or reservations. I'm currently 33 years old and live in Montevideo. It was 2009. I was 17 years old. That day, I remember going with my friends to the plaza early to play soccer. I always made a point of going, taking advantage of the time and the good weather. I spent a long time there, and then we started walking home. We passed by the house of a guy who was cleaning his garage. The amount of alcohol he gave us was unbelievable. I'd never seen so much alcohol in one place. That was the first sign of trouble. The day went by uneventfully. Night fell, and before that, we had arranged to meet 3 of my friends at the Rambla, the waterfront, to drink and hang out. We went and drank until 4 a.m. When we tried to head back to our neighborhood, we realized the street was blocked off. We saw that the only way back was through the cemetery. What we saw there was incredible. As we went in and walked around, we saw a guy who was about 6.5 feet tall, dressed all in black leather, who scared us and chased us for a good part of the way. What was alarming was that we suddenly had to separate, and we had agreed to meet at our usual spot, but only 3 of us showed up. Days passed, and our friend didn't appear. It wasn't until a week later that we heard from him. He was hospitalized in serious condition, with numerous lacerations and bruises all over his body. It looked as if he had been tortured. Sometime later, he began to remember the incident. Years passed, and we mustered up the courage to go looking for that thing, but we never found it. I won't deny that the whole thing still makes me uneasy, but now, as an adult, I still go out at night, and I'm not comfortable doing so. These days, I have a lot of respect for life and energies. I'm one of those people who now trusts my body's instincts completely. If something smells bad, there's probably a reason for it. And there you have it, 4 terrifying encounters that prove some things are better left untouched. These stories remind us that the past doesn't always stay buried, and sometimes objects carry more than just memories. They carry spirits, energy, and darkness that refuses to fade. Here at Horror Sector, we bring you the stories that others are too afraid to tell. If these tales left you unsettled, you're not alone. The question is, will you look at everyday objects the same way again? Stay vigilant, stay aware, and remember, horror is closer than you think. Until next time, this is Horror Sector, signing off into the darkness.